lighting is dazzling, and I hope it's as flattering as it is dazzling. I was waiting from the queue from her. Welcome, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, to the revival and the return of Solvitur Ambulando here at Sunset Lodge. We're so happy to have all you here. We're so happy to bring this series back, and we're starting it off in a beautiful way. I recognize Michael over here, who is live streaming this tonight, and anyone who needs, we can provide the link for the live stream if you want to share it or watch it again later. It's going to be so good, you might want to re-watch it. It'll be that vibrant. So without further ado, I would like to present our presenter for tonight, and that's Christopher Harbrant, who's right here. He will be presenting on the work of Paul Foster Case. It's going to be a fascinating night, and Christopher, welcome.
Hi, how's everyone today? Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Paul Foster Case and the F.L.O, which some of us here are part of, and as the continuation of his work. And then I really want to open it up to discussion, because every group has its own energy, and that's usually more interesting than what any authorized narrative wants to be. So are people here generally familiar with Paul Foster Case, or yes? Okay. I'll just give a brief kind of rundown. Paul Foster Case, originally from upstate New York, was made a Mason in upstate New York. He was in Chicago in the 20s when the New Thought people were around. New Thought becomes later New Age, a lot of the power of positive thinking, etc. Back in New York, worked for vaudeville as an organist, actually, believe it or not, which gave him a lot of time to do his researches into tarot, Kabbalah, other things. Gets involved with the Golden Dawn Temple there, and is involved until he becomes a chief of the temple there, one of the chiefs of the temple there, before finally moving to California and starting his own order called Builders of the Adytum. You probably know they're still in existence. So that's kind of a brief rundown of his history. What's interesting about him is that he is a Mason, but he's also esoteric, or he started esoteric groups. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today is what do we mean by esoteric? You know, people are like, this group is esoteric. This is, what does this mean? Some people are afraid of that. Some people think it's, better or something or whatever. We always think that it means that it's for those of us that need more work. But actually, really what it is it's nothing separate. It's really kind of a deepening of experience rather than something else entirely. So, for example, we're all pretty much Masons of one sort or another. It's a more concentrated version of that in a sense. We seek to be more mindful, whereas that's not stressed as much. You're free to do that, of course, but it's more the approach. So in our work, we highlight that. And one of the things that Case highlights in his work on tarot and Kabbalah is the imagination. And if we think about alchemy and the red rose and the white rose and what one of the things they represent, the mind, the intellect, the rationality, and then the body, the emotions, the nephesh, etc. The combination of those two is imagination. Imagination kind of partakes of both of those things. And in Masonry, this is why memory is stressed, because the faculty of memory, which was the queen of the liberal arts, is that faculty that allows us to imagine. So when we're doing degree work and we remember things, we walk through it. The old art of memory that they used to teach, you store things everywhere and you walk through it in your head. This gives you the ability to visualize, to imagine, and it opens up aspects of the brain that we don't normally use. So one of the things that Case stresses in his work and that we do in our work at the F.L.O. is the development of this imaginative capacity. And it's absolutely key. It unlocks all the other kind of practices. So this is really key. Another thing is that the symbols in that are a lot the same. For example, if we take the stones here, the ashlars, very familiar. Builders, masonry, what's the most basic thing? The stone, right? In masonry, this is called the ashlar. Has anyone ever looked that up or what that word is. It's a kind of a weird word, isn't it? I always assumed it was Hebrew, but it's not. It comes from Latin, and it's actually axilia. It's a diminutive form of axis. The first definition of it is the pole star, and the second one is the highest heaven. So, and then fourth meaning down below is plank or stone used in building. So right away, it's telling us off the bat that the stone, as we all know, the philosopher's stone, etc., is something very special, something that seems common, that was rejected, actually becomes the most important thing. And even that word that was chosen for stone was chosen on purpose because it really represents the axis mundi, the still point of the turning world. It's every individual is basically a spark of divinity, is what that says at root. And that's why there's a rough ashlar and a finished ashlar, our state before and state after doing the work. So again, to contrast esoteric and exoteric, I don't like those words, but we would be thinking about all those layers of symbolism doing our work. That would be in our minds as we're doing the work. We would also be thinking the word for stone that's used in the Bible and in the Masonic work is Eben, and that has the value of 53, which is also the angle in the Pythagorean triangle and is used in the pyramid. And 53 has the meaning of the union of God and man, basically. That's what its meaning comes down to. So again, the stone was chosen for that reason. That's exactly what it represents. The kind of duality, coexistence of those two things. And this is one of the key things in Paul Foster Case's work, and his True Invisible Rosicrucian Order, and his tarot work. He stresses this point time and time again. If you're familiar with his tarot, you see that the cube is in a lot of the tarot cards. The Empress, the Emperor, they all sit on the cubic stone. And again, this is that same symbolism. There's a lot to the symbolism of gematria and everything. I won't bore you with that. It certainly is fascinating. But one of the other meanings of stone happens to be light, the light of the stars. And again, what this saying is that literally we are made of light. We are beings of light. Everything we see around us is made from light. It sounds fantastic in a way, and yet people used to have no trouble believing this. Of course, it makes sense. You're dependent upon deity for everything. But we know it now as more of a physical fact as well. The sun feeds plants. That's the only food they need. And from plants, animals eat, we eat. Everything is driven by the sun. The temperature to support life, everything, including our planet being condensed out of the gases of the sun from the very beginning. So literally everything is made of light. And that's also one of the breakthroughs in more esoteric work that we try to work with. So, for example, in Masonry, we say the search for light might be a little bit more literal than you expect. That light is not just metaphorical, but is within each human individuality. And our work focuses on uncovering that light and amplifying it to the degree that is possible. So I wanted to say a little bit about us too. Some of us are here tonight, my colleagues Diane and Aliyah. We are an organization, the Fraternitas Lux Occulta. It's a fraternity of the hidden light. And again, this hidden light refers to the stone. It's the exact same thing, which is its importance for today. But we continue his work that Case started. So we're in that tradition, and it is based on, again, he was a Mason, and it's informed by that work, I'll say. And we seek to deepen that experience and more explicitly study also the Kabbalah and the Tarot. The Tarot functions, I'm sure probably everyone knows, as kind of an alphabet of the mysteries. And all the letters have a certain coded meaning, and one can lay cards in such a way to discover things and use them for meditation. And most importantly, as previously mentioned, as a vehicle for imagination. projection of the stone, if you will. And that way one experiences an aspect of consciousness or the divine directly. So, there's a lot of different directions we can go. I'd actually really like it if anyone has questions or aspects about Paul Foster Case or our organization, if you have any questions or...
As a matter of clarification.
Constantine, here at the altar.
As a matter of clarification, esoteric in classical Greek means interior or internal, and exoteric means the opposite, exterior. That's all.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. I like that. It refers to the inner side of something, that it's the contemplation of the tradition rather than something separate, the interface of it. Thank you so much. Thank you also to I meant to start off by thanking all the brothers of this Lodge 369 who are incredible hosts, not just today, but in general for hosting so many groups and putting this together and other things, especially Justin, thank you. You who seem to tirelessly work to bring people together and advance fraternity as an ideal. We really appreciate that. And this Lodge just has such a great feeling, so we really appreciate that. Thanks.
So Chris, thanks. I was curious regarding the work of Paul Foster Case. Do you know if Masonry was something he happened to go into kind of in his early stage in life, and then he spent maybe 10 or 20 years in B.O.T.A, and then kind of the culmination of all of his knowledge was in F.L.O, or do you not kind of know how that progressed and where he kind of ended towards the end of his life?
Sure. I mean, I think he came in being a certain way. A lot of people are, but he was made a Mason before any of this other stuff. Now, was Masonry what put him on to a lot of these other things? Possibly. It amplified it for sure. But I think earlier than that, apparently the story is he was always interested in ledger domain, kind of magic tricks or whatever, cards and stuff. And he was always interested in cards. And one day a family friend said to him, where do cards come from? And he didn't know, so he started researching it. And that's how he came upon tarot, and he just became fascinated with it. So that was pre-Masonry. So I think his mind was already running in that direction. But no doubt he found companionship and refreshment in the Masonic Lodge for sure. So he's involved with that, and then he's involved with New Thought people. He seems to always have pursued kind of this work, tarot, Kabbalah, which he was really quite masterful at. And that was always his kind of domain. So he followed that everywhere. When he was in Chicago with the New Thought people, a lot of them were doing that. At that time, he actually was studying Eastern techniques, and he had to stop using them because he was very sensitive as an individual, and he opened himself up widely, and it was too much for him. So he stopped doing that, and that, I think, reinforced his commitment to kind of Western modalities of spirituality, of practice, etc. He says all throughout his writings, too, that you shouldn't mix the techniques, that can be dangerous, certainly for a sensitive person like himself, So he experimented with that at that time, probably learned some stuff from it, made some good contacts there, like Michael Whitty, a couple other people, very famous. And after that, it was the Golden Dawn. And from that point on, of course, came up in that system, became a chief in that system, then went on to found his own order as a vehicle of expression. He wanted to elucidate the tarot and Kabbalah. In fact, Case had already worked out the Hebrew attributions for the tarot by the time they had been published. And he double-checked them against what he had done at that time. So, he was already working on that issue, per se. So, kind of tarot, Kabbalah, things that are he's very good at. And I don't know if people are familiar with the B.O.T.A lessons that he wrote, but it's some of the most amazing material. And the thing is, this Case was never really that big in his lifetime, but he's becoming increasingly more important as time passes. Part of that has been because the lessons of B.O.T.A were only by subscription. That's the only way you could really get them. But that's opening up now. Some of his other stuff has been published in book format that used to be lessons. And it's some of the best stuff out there on Tarot and Kabbalah, hands down. I mean, it's good. He's a fantastic writer. He's clear. He's precise. He doesn't waste words. He's not into being a mystagogue. I mean, it's just like as straight as it could be and very learned, you know? So, you know, he's becoming more popular all the time, I think, because of that. He seems to be, you know, gaining in momentum. So basically the work we do is kind of picking up with him, you know, with him setting up that system and using the Tarot and Kabbalah for the work.
Do you know how widespread B.O.T.A became? I know they have like chapters in Los Angeles and other parts of the world, but I never got a chance to join. I understand they teach by monographs, but I have friends from all over the world that have always said that it was the best way for them to learn tarot and a lot of Kabbalah. So I know friends from, you know, from many different countries where they don't have a lodge there, and that's where I think a lot of those monographs came in. Can you speak a little bit to that as to how much it grew, and then also, so as far as when he started the F.L.O, that was more an initiatory society, but did he have any monographs or any kind of curriculum within, in the same way that B.O.T.A had?
Yes, there are papers that are part of degrees that are authored by him. I'll say that. As far as B.O.T.A's influence, I don't know in terms of numbers, etc. But certainly the effect that that material has had is legendary, you know. Just about anyone involved in these circles is conversant with it on some level or knows of him to some degree. He actually also had contact with Spencer Lewis at AmWork. He wrote him a letter one time when he was in Chicago, somewhere around 1920. He wrote Lewis a letter saying, your symbolism on this number isn't quite right in my estimation. It should be this or whatever. And Spencer Lewis wrote back to him and he said, well, we're not really for people like you that kind of have it figured out. We're trying to help people that everyone else is taking advantage of to get to a certain point and help them or whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like interesting bit of history there. He seems to have touched like all the big groups, AmWork, you know, Golden Dawn, et cetera. He kind of, he was a very communicative person, you know. A lot of his letters do survive. He has a huge influence. Again, in terms of numbers, I don't know, but you know, there was a big presence in New Zealand, for example, Australia, New Zealand, in Europe as well. It's pretty strong there, but the material itself is so good that it's guaranteed to always be part of the tradition. You know, it's just really strong, really good. Like I said, no fluff, no mystagogery. He doesn't want to deceive anyone. He just puts it right out there. One gets the impression that he just really does want to bring people to light without mystifying anything, et cetera. You know, and that's kind of the approach that we take too. It's like, you know, the best secrets are those that can't be told because they're disclosed only in the chamber of reflection of the human heart, you know. But one has to develop to a certain point where that's possible. And that's done through, you know, all the work that we do within the lodge, you know, on tarot, Kabbalah, et cetera, meditation, and other stuff that, you know, Case authored. So I think he's huge.
In his essay on the Masonic letter G, that was probably later in his life, right? But I wonder if he alludes to it, or at all if he ever alluded to it meaning gnosis.
He does talk about that a little bit, but of course, if you've read that, you know he relates it to Gimel, the third letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is the high priestess, which is blue, you know. So he has a really great thing on that. Actually, that was more earlier, and it's one of his lesser known writings, but a really good one, I think. And I passed that one around to some people here. I think I gave Tony and someone else a copy of that, yeah. But it's a really good book. And he doesn't say definitively that, but he shows the different theories of like Mackey, et cetera, you know, that think it's this or that. And he shows what he thinks it is using the Gematria and other things within it for the 3 pillars, et cetera. So it's a really great little work. You can find it. It's public domain now, so good stuff.
So the monographs in B.O.T.A though, do you remember, because do they keep going like for many years?
Like for 15 years, yeah.
Go for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing. And then with F.L.O, is it top out at third degree, or is it, how many degrees are in
Well, just like with the Golden Dawn or most traditional Western initiatory societies, there's 3 main levels, but the initiation scheme follows the path of the Tree of Life, as does the Golden Dawn. So the 10 steps of the Tree of Life. And within that, there are 3 divisions per se, 3 tiers, if you will. So it follows that plan. So it's really based on the Golden Dawn formula because of his time there. I mean, we always think of it as the Paul Foster Case version of the Golden Dawn, basically, you know. So the emphasis there is on Hebrew, you know, rather than, say, Egyptian forms, and that's pretty much, you know, how we look at it. So, but it's really great work, very concentrated work. There's a lot there, and again, cases stuff on tarot, Kabbalah, Western mystery stuff is it's really dynamite. It's not many people that can touch it, you know, for the depth of penetration. Anyone else? Question?
Yeah, I have a question. I should go to the mic for the purposes of the last year. But I'm not that familiar with case. I'm just wondering if you could go a little bit more into what B.O.T.A is.
B.O.T.A was an organization that he started first around the 20s, mid-20s. He called it a modern-day mystery school.
Okay.
So he felt that he had not a mandate, but a task to help bring a lot of stuff that had been esoteric in the past or only available through very rarefied means to a greater audience. So he started writing these correspondence courses on what he called the life power, you know, his name for grand architect of the universe or deity. And it's unfolding in the life of the individual. And this is done through tarot, each tarot card being a certain step along the way, based on either a 3-fold or 7-fold schema, and Kabbalah, the mysticism of Judaism, and, well, it gets very syncretic moving through the Renaissance, etc., but that tradition. So they offer correspondence courses where one works alone and does these lessons. They're sent, you know, every 2 weeks, and sometimes they have exercises. You have to color your own tarot cards, for example, is one, so that they're really impressed in you.
Oh, that'd be great.
And so it's kind of a system of spiritual development or spiritual exploration, you could say. But again, you know, the later manifestation of that is, you know, the Fraternitas Lux Occulta, a hidden light. So that's more, even more, becoming more explicit, which was before only available through very, you know, rarefied, unusual channels. So again, it's about, people talk about this is, you know, the new era, et cetera, et cetera. Things are becoming more open, progressive, more people are seeking that experience. So it's kind of an opening up of the mysteries.
Great. I like that. I have another question too, unless someone else has one. Because even though standing here has a kind of a
Who could
principal's
deny such
office
a
feeling
dramatic
about
and
it.
commanding personality?
I had never heard of Paul Foster Case until this was announced. And I read up a little bit about him, and I understand that he was a musician, very accomplished to the point of embarking on a career as a violinist and a conductor, and had a doctorate in music. And there was a fork in the road. He chose this fork and left that one. Do you know anything about if he ever incorporated the music back into these teachings?
I can tell you he absolutely does, and that is also part of our work. So colors, tones, they're all light, right? They're all different vibrations of light. There's light, there's color, there's sound. If you think about the Masonic work too, those are also represented there. And they are used in that way. So different states of consciousness, you could say, are associated with different colors, with different musical tones, etc. And the idea is that every sense organ, every faculty of your mind has its correspondence. That's also one of the key distinguishing factors of esotericism, is that it always comes with the doctrine of correspondences along with imagination.
Yes.
And it's thinking analogically, right? This is what's necessary for meditation. You know, Patanjali defines meditation or samadhi as an unbroken flow of knowledge on a particular subject, right? And so like when you learn all these associations, when you meditate on one of those, your mind wheels around all these different associations that you've learned, and it opens up different pathways, and you do receive kind of a stream of knowledge from contemplating that you didn't know before through association. And that's the whole purpose of this training, you know what I mean? And again, the imagination, the memory work in Masonry is all with a mind to allow this to develop and happen.
Absolutely.
But that's a very apocryphal story. A lot of people don't know that. It's true. He felt that his contact gave him the choice so he could have a good life. He would have it easy, make good money, be happy, reasonable, all the rest of that kind of stuff and everything. Or he could take on this other work and help spread the light for people, but it would be very hard. He would suffer greatly. He would have a lot of trials. It would be very, very difficult. He'd often be hard-pressed and think he was at his end, as he often did during his lifetime. And that's what he chose, apparently. So, but it is ever thus, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. I'm going to sit down now.
I can't believe you like picked up on that story. You say, oh yeah, you don't know anything about it.
So I sort of
Yeah, I mean, I like that too, because for me, music is everything. You know, the universe couldn't exist without music, literally. And the thing with like the gematria and numbers and all that, the world really is all number. And for some people that sounds cold. It's not. It's music, you know. And yeah, and music, again, is that consciousness of imagination as well. It is the faculty of imagination par excellence, you know. And you know, one needs imagination to listen to music, isn't it? And it's also our best faculty of memory. You can remember every song you've ever heard, pretty much, right? Like most people probably have a database of 10,000 songs they know the words to. It's incredible. Like you remember so much better when it's music, and that's something to really think about, you know. So yes, that's very important in our work, and we like experimenting with that, and that's good stuff. Anyone else? You do have to go to the mic.
I do.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, okay. I have a layered question, actually. Okay, I had a question about F.L.O. So I know in a lot of fraternal orders, they'll have like an inner order and an outer order. And you have to have a certain amount of years, certain amount of connections and all that to get in the inner order and outer order. Does yours have that?
Well, as you say, that's always a part of esoteric traditions. There's an outer court, inner court, there's the peristyle, and then there's the inner temple. That's has always been thus. So it's the same way for everything. One has to prepare. For example, in Masonry, where were you first prepared to be made a Mason? Yes, in your heart, exactly. And that's kind of what that is saying, is that first purity, you get yourself right before you can enter the inner temple. And so inner, outer order, whatever, is metaphorical of that. Or as above, so below. Everything corresponds with each other. So yes, that is the case.
That's what I figured. Now, in your degrees and initiations and all of that, what are, I guess, because you said there's 3 levels, like a lot of them are, you know, things come in 3s, you know, in spirituality. How many degrees are in each one? Is it a total like 9 degrees? It's like that, you know, the first one is 4. How does that all
Let's
work?
say that
And what's the
there's
structure?
10 degrees, and those 10 degrees are in 3 tiers. That's the best way to put it. And you can, you know, look at the tree of life, kind of make some guesstimates
Right.
about what that means. But again, the middle pillar being consciousness
Right.
would make a natural kind of division for that. So, and they can be related to different faculties of the soul as well, you know. So
Right.
first one is just like in alchemy, right? sulfur, mercury, salt. Each one has its purification before final unification.
And you work with your structure, do you have to like memorize certain rituals or like book study? Is it more structured or is it more about fraternity and kind of like?
For sure. I have a really good mentor who really told me early on, always stressed the importance of memory to me. This guy's a huge Mason, and he always told me like the hallmark of any authentic esoteric tradition is going to have an accent on memory always. He's told me always remember that. And I always have, and I've like really thought about that over the years. Memory is kind of an incredible faculty, you know. I've always enjoyed memory. I thought it's an interesting kind of quality, and the development of memory, imagination, etc., is really important. And so, yes, there is memorization of many kinds, and if you're familiar with Masonry, etc., it's similar along those lines. Odes are memorized, and of course, if one is an officer of the temple, you know, there are roles to embody and memorize as well, just like in a Masonic lodge.
Yeah, cool. Okay, answers. Thanks.
Everyone, this is Diane. She's a member of our Grand Lodge. She's a really wonderful person, and she's our kind of our own cornerstone in a way.
Yeah, I just had a comment. When people asked what's the difference between B.O.T.A and F.L.O's method of working, the B.O.T.A stresses more the correspondence courses. We also teach the book learning and that foundation, but we stress ritual. And I think we're one of the only places that in this kind of work, doing Paul Foster Case's work, that is stressing ritual work in temple. So that's a major difference.
Absolutely, and a really key point. And I think that also comes down to his Masonry as well, is, you know, I think he was a lecturer, if I remember correctly. I always like the lecturers. I think one of the geniuses of these systems is that with memorization, whether you know it or not, the work works. So that's kind of the genius of the system, you know? And when you memorize it, you internalize it, it has its effect. And so a lot of the lecturers, grand lecturers I knew in my district, I really liked those guys. And I felt like it had touched them in a way it hadn't others, you know? And I always, again, that's always been an accent for me. I always found that was really important. And I think that it works as a kind of machine, and that's kind of the beauty of the system. You know, people get into Masonry or these groups for all kinds of reasons. Some people just want simple fraternity. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no, you know, compunction to do one thing or the other. But the kind of genius of it is that it works either way, and that's the beauty of it. It's just like in our work, we want to speed it up a little bit because, as I said earlier, some of us need more work. So.
Chris, I know you're very versed in Gematria. I wondered if you could expand a little bit on the Gematria in Kabbalah. It's always, for me, it was a big turning point learning that, of course, Pythagoras 2,500 years ago said that all is number. But during that time, Judaism and Kabbalah had already been around for a few thousand years, I believe. So could you speak a little bit on the overlap in some of the traditions? Of course, all of these orders, all of these organizations all teach their own way, but kind of it always comes back to that same central point. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
For sure. I mean, it's hard to speak about Gematria without being too wonkish, but a couple things that are important is that there were no numbers in Hebrew or Greek, so the way you counted was by using the letters. And so every word then is going to have a value. It's basically made up of numbers. And sometimes words are substituted based on this with a word of an equal value. So one of the key words in Masonry and esotericism, etc., one key number is 13. You just have to look at the seal of the United States, which has 13 all over it. It's also used in the Greek of the New Testament. It's used something like, I think, 2,000 times or something. And it's always used as the name for Christ. And so it's referencing that. And in Hebrew, 13 means unity and love. And this is like pointed out time and time again in Scripture. So it's a very key words. So you can see certain words being used over and over again that have a kind of code that means something. 13 is a unity because it's prime. It's because there are 13 full moons every year, so that unites the solar and the lunar, the greater and lesser lights, right? So that's a unity again. And so it represents unity on multiple levels. So anytime you see 13 or that's referenced, then you know that's what it's talking about. Furthermore, the 47th problem of Euclid, also known as the Pythagorean triangle, the other two oblique angles, one is 37, which is the other number used for the Christos in the New Testament and the Old Testament as well. So everything is a multiple of 37, basically. And the other angle is 52 degrees, which is, again, that word for stone. So these are like loaded terms, and it's not just that. Why is this problem so important? Why do we talk about it? Why do we mention it? It's not just because you're finding the hypotenuse, but because it speaks to all these things. It's kind of a resume, and it's also the capstone of the pyramid, which represents the individual. You know, the four kingdoms of nature come together. The capstone is the enlightened individual, if you will. So Gematria can show a lot of those relationships, and again, it's not so much, codes and all that kind of stuff come out of this tradition as well. You know, Reuchlin and others, Trithemius in the Renaissance period, but it was there already because of the substitution of letters and numbers. And as I say, it can be really kind of wonkish, but it can also be very enlightening. And I think that Case, uses it where it is very enlightening rather than intimidating or kind of, but again, he's a musician, so he's coming at it in a more, wet way, a warmer way, not just so cold and abstract. But number has also always been a part of, the work, or Pythagoras, the 1 is the 4 that becomes 10. And, that's in the tarot with the Wheel of Fortune card. It's everywhere in the work. And just contemplating number alone is, a huge part of the work. So it's not just like a exercise. Again, my friend used to tell me about meetings they would have in the old days in the 70s, and they'd all be sitting around smoking their pipes, he said, and one person would say a number quite sagely, and then everyone would kind of chortle and go, and another person would say like a number in a phrase. And he said, this guy's sort of ridiculous, That's not what it's about, but with the right application of it, it's certain words that are used in our rituals, like stone, for example. When you unpack them, you find incredible connections. And again, it's about that process of connection in the mind, the unbroken flow that allows the light to break through and wake you up out of your sleepwalking state, basically. So.
Hi, thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, could you talk about, is there any connection between sound, light, chakra, kundalini, the tarot, and then on a different topic, is there any connection between Case and Ernest Holmes? Was there any, through any cross breeding in that?
Interesting. Yeah. Kundalini, chakras, yes, all part of the work. In the West, we would refer to them more as the planets. When we speak about the inner planets or the planets, it's referencing the chakras. Or in alchemy, the 7 metals, right? Same thing. So anytime you see those texts and they reference those metals or those planets, it's really talking about, the inner stars or whatever. Or, the serpent, of course, being the kundalini. The lion is something similar, which should be remarkable to all of us as Masons. That event, by the way, is available in any town in America, which is something still so incredible to me that, we think about the mysteries of the past, but one can go to a lodge just about in any township in this country. And I've been to some small places where there are lodges, and that experience is available to a person. It's really astounding when you think about it. And whether or not a person is consciously aware of that, it doesn't matter, because again, the work does its work. And if a person is, then they see and know those layers as well. Both ways, it's kind of like a win-win. So yeah, that is a big part of our work, and there is a plan of unfoldment, if you will. There is an order where these things should happen. They should not be kind of carelessly, played around with or whatever. We have a certain way that it's unloaded that's safe and natural, based on harmonic proportion, etc. And it really is all about that, because all these traditions, esoteric, whatever, we're really talking about kind of like Hermeticism, right, and everything. And that's not a dogma. It's not a faith. It's not a religion. What it is it's a spiritual technology, right? And Masonry kind of has always configured itself that way too, as not being a doctrine or creed or religion or whatever. It's kind of like a technology in a way, right? Building is a technology, etc. It's the same thing with us and the Hermetic work. It's a technology. It's a tool rather than something to believe in. So it does get down to exactly the physical reality of what you are as a being. Your energy systems. What those energy systems are, how to purify them, and by purifying them, allow them to have their best expression, right? For example, like the planet Mars, let's say everyone talks about Mars, like, oh, he's kind of edgy guy, right? But Mars is also the god of fraternities, right? It represents all being siblings under one parent, and so there is that idea of unity there as well. And so that's kind of the process. You have these kind of inherited subconscious ideas about what Mars is or what this is. Those have to be reconfigured to be in alignment with what the truth is, and that would be that. So that's kind of the plan of unfoldment. And there are certain tarot cards that correspond to the different chakras, going up and down, and they all have their musical notes associated with them. And there are practices we have where we visualize the said card, and have the musical tone in mind as well, and the color and everything else. And again, it's about saturating your consciousness in every way possible with that particular aspect of yourself and deity that you're exploring at that moment. So, and again, imagination memory is what opens that process up. So, yeah. I mean, what do you think about the use of memory in Masonry? Was that accented for you heavily? Yeah. I mean, not just you have to memorize this stuff, but where the brothers and Lodge were like, look, you really got to memorize this stuff. Like,
Well, and my background is theater.
Oh.
So, ritual, sacred space, bringing in memory to it. It's one thing. It's one thing if it's just words and sound, it's noise.
Right.
The words and sounds with meaning, that's when it lands.
That's it exactly. Yep. You have to memorize it so well you don't think about it, and you're right there. You embody that. You literally change your consciousness into that thing. That is key. It says it so perfectly. Thank you.
And then, were there any connections between Ernest and...
I don't know of any explicitly.
Like,
I'll have
I was
to.
like, oh, wow. Do you know if the new thought movement was kind of birthed after that, or
What's that, Justin?
do you know if the new thought movement was prior to a lot of what B.O.T.A and F.L.O?
Well, sure. Yeah. It's definitely precursors to that. Well, Case was one of the. Speaking of the new thought thing, have people heard of the Kabbalion? Yeah. So Case is one of the supposed authors of that. It's by 3 initiates, and supposedly Michael Whitty, Paul Foster Case, were 2 of them. So that's new thought.
Was he under the penning the 3 initiates too, or who was?
That's, yeah, supposedly he was one of them, okay. They say. So Case's widow seems to verify that. So, but I consider that like a new thought book. So it definitely comes out of that. He's influenced and informed by that. But again, I think mostly what he took from it, I mean, like Atkinson was a big one, right? And he published under like 8 different pseudonyms, like including Magus Incognito. I wanted to trot that one out, but he ruined it for the rest of us. So, but and also some names like Rama Chakra Bindi and stuff like that. So he publishes like 8,000 different books. You know what I mean? The guy was like prolific, and he was like the Stephen King of New Thought or something. And so that material is really out there, but a lot of it is based on kind of Eastern techniques, again, with meditation. And although we do use breathing techniques as well, they're different than the Eastern ones. And again, Case's experience was that those techniques didn't work for him because he was very sensitive. You know, he was a real kind of sensitive. He could receive very well, et cetera. And they kind of short-circuited him a little bit. In fact, he said his inner voice told him to go out and have 2 drinks and eat a steak right away to ground himself one day after he was doing some of these practices and just got too opened or whatever. So I think like it did influence him. I think he was finding his way. It's like a way station on the way to get to maybe Golden Dawn, where he was more maybe solidified. Although I think he was really solidified early, but he was really more advocate of kind of more Western techniques and the importance of not mixing them. Of course, he knows a lot about the Eastern techniques and can speak to them very, very well. But he realized constitutionally, as Americans, another modality he felt more appropriate. So yeah, so he does gather some stuff from them, but in terms of techniques, etc., he's much more systematic in his thought, more organized, whereas like the New Thought people are kind of ad hoc in a way, you know what I mean? So he's more integral, as Aristotle would say. Yeah, exactly, more structured.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. No one escapes the mic.
Again, thank you.
Thank you.
You piqued my interest when you started talking about Case beginning the B.O.T.A.
Uh-huh.
And I was just curious about what his foundational for inspirational reference was. Like, did he go Egyptian? Was it Hermetic text? Was it Essianic? Like, or if he speaks about it, if there's anything that was more important or enlightening to him that he decided to keep versus the things that he maybe, say, put aside and didn't want to keep around, or the things that he thought were super important in those older teachings?
I think the baseline of Case is Tarot, thank you by the way, Tarot and also Kabbalah. And I think that he had tried for years to publish his attributions of the Tarot, which like we all take for granted these days, you know, the kind of correspondences and attributions of the Tarot. But even back in that time in the 20s, it wasn't that set. And he had worked out his own system and he was looking to publish it. One person published it out of Chicago again, a New Thought person in Azov, I believe. And they changed his attributions. They made the swords, the wands deck, which changes it considerably. And he didn't like that or whatever, but they were the publishers. And he was constantly trying to work out his system of tarot and Kabbalah, you know, which is like his main thing. When he got to the Golden Dawn, I think he saw that it was presented there systematically, but not, again, to his liking. He actually wrote lessons for the Golden Dawn on Kabbalah that they then adopted and started using everywhere. So some of those things are his, right? So again, he was very studious. It's said that he was a rabbi in a past life. Now, he doesn't ever say this himself, but apparently, I mean, he has that within him. If you want to read that metaphorically or whatever, you know, it's interesting to me as a metaphor, I'll put it that way. But it always seems to me that's his strength and his current, and he seems to take to it like water. It's just natural for him. It's the way he thinks. And I think he was always streamlining it, always looking for the right vehicle or expression for that. And you see those different steps along the way. So in New Thought, he tries to publish it, doesn't quite work out there. Golden Dawn, he sends those things, wrote the papers, and then Moyna Mathers actually swapped it and put their name on it so that it came from their temple or whatever, but he's the one that authored it, I mean, which happens all the time, and he didn't care about that. So then after that, he just wanted, or was guided to start his own vehicle where this thing he had inside him, this system he had worked out, could be expressed without being hampered by order politics or someone not understanding the attributions, just the way he had felt that it had come through for him, you know. And he already has spent years and years and years studying this stuff. I mean, he's a very serious student, you know, like if you read Case at all, you know, you can tell he's a very profound student, right? Like he's very penetrating and very deep in his analysis. So I just think like he was always on that quest from the beginning, and it was just more and more finding a way how to streamline that to find the right vehicle for that to happen. So, and I think he needed his own vehicle to do that, basically. You know, he's not an out front kind of guy, you know. Also, if you read him, you can get that from him. He's not someone that, you know, wants to be at the front of the podium speaking and all the rest of that. In fact, he didn't really like it, but I think, again, Kabbalah means to receive, or the reception, right? And we get back to the same ideas, and I think he was really good at reception, and he had received a lot of these things through contemplation, and knew that they were right and integral, and that was just the way he could get it out at the time. I mean, think about what was going on at that time. Starting that in the 20s, we think we're so hip now. There's so much stuff going on at that time, you know, with New Thought and these guys, and, you know, it's pretty interesting stuff. It's also early Los Angeles history, too, you know. These guys are all coming out here. He was out here. Manly Hall, you know, another one. So they were vaguely in contact as well. So, you know, it's the esoteric and Masonic history of Los Angeles is fascinating. Justin, you're a repeat offender?
Yeah, repeat offender. I have a good way to seg into, might be a good way to wrap up. I'm curious where you think we're at, just personally, in regard to the, you know, the ending of the Piscean age and the birth of the new Aquarian age, or the, you know, age of Osiris, the Aeon of Osiris. Like in one sense, you have all the fear of mysticism and occultism kind of dissipating, in the sense that we can even have this talk here, because for a long time, many Masonic lodges wouldn't allow this type of thing, and thankfully we're past that, especially in California, to a degree. In some sense, you have like magic kits being sold at Forever 21. But then in another sense, we were on a text earlier today, a lot of us at the lodge, and I was joking around about how Oswald Spanger had termed, before civilization changes or things collapse, you see a resurgence of what he calls the second religiousness. We're kind of seeing that now, where there are Masonic lodges getting firebombed, even in California. Culver City got like a Molotov cocktail thrown at it. We've had many things happen at this lodge where people have made 3-minute threats on a phone call, or they've dropped off like a letter with Jesus all over it about how they're going to come in with a weapon. There are other Masonic orders and fraternal orders around California and the world that are having active shooter drills. Just kind of curious where you think we're at. I mean, it looks like we're on a good path, but it also looks like we might have a future where there might be Christian suicide bombers in the marketplace.
For sure. I love that you bring up Spengler, like, who picks up on that idea of Vicos, of the 4 ages, you know, gold, silver, bronze, iron, etc. And again, if that fits in perfectly with Case, who he would say it's the Yod-He, Vav-He, you know, the fire, water, you know, air, and earth, traditional 4 elements. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think with the end of one age and the beginning of another, there's always a lot of overlap, and a lot of snapback, right? Just like with anything, when something is changing, there's a little bit of clamor from people on the other side, and that's just kind of a sign of transition. But in terms of where we are with it, I mean, aren't we there? Isn't this it? I mean, like I said, you can go to a lodge anywhere in this country and have an incredible experience if you are duly and truly prepared in your heart, you know? And that's the thing, it's partly on you, but that experience is available to everyone. Now think about that. Like, again, we always look back to the Greek mysteries. Oh, it's incredible this time. But I mean, literally, we have that here, you know, and I mean, everywhere, and everyone can participate, you know what I mean? And it's amazing and astounding. So I think that is certainly the case. Certainly in the founding of this country, those people were involved with that. I mean, it's all over. The Symbolism. Case has another book on the Great Seal of the United States, which is really interesting. And that's rather longer conversation, but if you look at it and when it was designed from the very beginning as well. All the things are there, all the symbolism. Believe it or not, it incorporates the astrological chart of the US, if you can believe that. So some people at that time were aware of that, and that is incorporated, and you can see that if you are part of the tradition, you know the telltale signs, etc. So I think, as you probably would agree, there was that whole conversation with the Illuminati and everything of the United States of Europe, right? At the time, they wanted to do it, but those Europeans were always bickering and fighting and couldn't work it out. So there was a plan to start anew. And with the new era, new aeon, however you want to categorize it. But I do think we're there. I mean, it is a process of transition. The thing is, we're so used to it. Like, even cell phones are miraculous. Like, I hate to be so consumer culture-ish about it, but I mean, the truth is, it is a miracle you can speak to someone anywhere in the world like that. I mean, if you told someone that even 100 years ago, they would just be gobsmacked, you know? But the mind is such that it becomes used to these things easily, used to miracles and all things like that easily. And, you know, we lose kind of our sense of wonder, and that's our great challenge, I think, is to reinvest that other side of ourselves, you know, that we seek to do in our work, the search for light, etc. We need the ability to process all that information as well, you know. Hermes is a tricky god. He's also the god of thieves, you know, and his love for technology can also kind of rob you of some things, right? So you have to, that's our challenge, is with all that available, we kind of have this broad, you know, axis covered, but sometimes we're missing that y-axis of depth, you know. And again, Mercury's the god that can go between three worlds, so that's the vertical element, and that's what it is for us to unfold, we believe, you know. Yeah.
So you were saying that Paul Foster Case was very studious, and as you know, the occult tarot goes back well before him. So was he influenced by Pappas or Levi? Who were the people he was reading? I'd be kind of curious to hear that.
Absolutely. Basically, he read everything that was available. Yes, he read Pappas, you know, he read all those guys. And again, he had been working on his own, you know, attributions and compared those. And one of the big leaps he made was moving the Fool card to being Aleph, which it wasn't before, and he knew that then it would match up with the Hebrew, and that was a big, you know, click for him as well too. But absolutely, he read all those, right? He absorbed everything. I mean, he's the kind of person that read widely in the tradition and read deeply as well too. You know, he was conversant and familiar with all of those, and he references all of them in his writings as well. You know. He will constantly reference them, quote from them throughout all of his writings, both correspondence and in the published material that's available. So he's very conversant with the tradition. You know, he's kind of like an academic in a way without being too insular, but he kind of takes pride, I feel, in really knowing the tradition and knowing it fully, and giving it kind of the respect that it deserves, not, you know, doing it halfway. And he really does take it as a responsibility to absorb all of that, you know, and that's one of the things I really love about him, is he's kind of very complete in that way. He doesn't leave anything out. Like, there isn't kind of a philosophy he doesn't address or whatever in laying out his thing. He's aware of all the criticisms, he knows the different arguments, and he addresses all of them in his writing. And something I really respect. You know, you read different people and you're like, they're missing this, they're missing that. Like with him, I feel like he's really complete in a lot of ways because he has read so deeply and studied deeply so long. I mean, he didn't have TV, you know?
Yeah.
He didn't have Netflix, so.
So I think, would it be fair to say, my feeling, because I read the tarot and I study the tarot a lot, there seems to be schools of tarot that are distinctly now organized, and is it fair to say they all have merit? So, like, for instance, the Marseille people won't even look at any decks after the Marseille because they want to stick to the symbolism.
Right.
Then you have, of course, Aleister Crowley, who I happen to really enjoy his deck, has a completely different system, but is also very deep, but different. It seems to me, isn't it fair to say that these systems may be different, but if you dig deep enough, they can go to some of the same truths?
Yeah, I mean, speaking personally and also Masonically too, I think there's only one sin, and that is the sin of division, and that is thinking that something is outside of yourself or different or whatever. And this is also a point that Case makes. I don't like that kind of sectarianism. I do believe in the values of fraternity and harmony. I think it's the sweetest thing, and I think that's something that we strive for and work for all the time. And so an attitude like that about this camp and that camp, as you say, Marseille people won't look at this or that. I think it's a lamentable attitude. I think there's always something to learn from different things, and it's just arrogant to think otherwise. I believe in openness, as we do, and none of us knows the complete story of truth. How could we? And once we think that we do, we close off any possible new learning. We close off light because we think we see it. And again, that's the battle that we struggle with all the time, that monkey mind that wants to subvert the process. It wants to get control of it because it doesn't want to lose control, but in doing that, it also prevents our quote unquote progress,
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad you brought that point up. Thank you. I think it's really important.
Hi, thank you. So this is my first introduction to Case, and I've been a student of Kabbalah a lot in my life, and I know that reincarnation is a very big part of it. And you alluded to that a bit, that something about his past life. So if you could talk about where that fits in with his studies and what it was with if there was a place for that in his system and how that worked for him.
Yes, he does talk about, that's great. I'm really glad you heard about him tonight. I'll get you the name of the rabbi that supposedly, who was somewhat known or whatever, if you're interested. I can't remember it offhand, but I'll give it to you afterwards. But yeah, he certainly does talk about that in his writings, and it falls in line with that or what you might expect if you're aware of the other discussions on the topic coming from the West. I mean, Pythagoras also, was not a believer, but advocated reincarnation. And I guess in the Kabbalah, it's more related to Kismet too, right? Because the only way to make sense of kind of karma is with reincarnation. You know what I mean? It's the only thing that it kind of explains it or whatever. Yeah, it's called tikkun, right? Right. And so absolutely, he does talk about that in his breakdown of the 32 paths and other things, his translations that he did. They're really great. He's really understands the sense of things. And again, like I said, just like with everything, he's just so penetrating and deep and I think great. So I hope you explore him more. Be happy to give you some materials. And maybe you can give some to me too. All right. Anyone else? Are you gonna unintroduce me or?
I'm not familiar with unintroducing anyone, but let's have a great big hand for this.
Thank you guys. I mean, again, I want to thank this lodge and what they put together. Justin, thank you so much. And everyone here, because this is what makes it possible. This is the practice of fraternity, of sorority. This is the work that we do. And it's only possible when people come together and do it. And that's the miracle, really. It's not that more people don't do it, but the fact that people do it at all is really the miracle. So thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for your service.